The air on Triton always tasted of metal and ozone, a sterile cocktail pumped through the city's circulatory system by the architects. It was the taste of peace, they said, the flavor of a future saved from the ashes of Earth's great fire. Kalen tasted only the ghost of his sister's laughter, a memory so faded it felt like a dream. He stood on the maintenance gantry, 1,000 meters above the polished chrome and soft, pulsing lights of Elysium, the moon's capital. Below, the remnants of humanity moved with the placid, unhurried grace the architects encouraged. They called it the balance, a state of perfect societal equilibrium where passion, grief, and rage were smoothed away like imperfections on a stone. But Kalen's grief was a jagged thing, a shard of obsidian in his heart that the balance could not polish. It had been 5 years since Elia was chosen. The announcement had been a celebration, her name read aloud in the central plaza, a great honor for a girl of 12. She was to join the off-world integration program, a chance to become part of the architect's grander cosmic design. He remembered her small, trembling hand in his, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. She had promised to send a message, a real one, not the sanitized, pre-approved communiques that trickled back from the other chosen, filled with empty platitudes about harmony and purpose. No message ever came. Now, Kalen's world was the hum of machinery, the cold logic of the atmospheric processors that kept Triton's thin nitrogen shell from freezing the city solid. He was a flow technician, a glorified plumber for the planet's lifeblood, and it was his insignificance that kept him safe. No one looked twice at the man in the gray coveralls with a diagnostic slate tucked under his arm. This anonymity was his only weapon. He keyed in his access code, the gantry whining as it lowered him into the processor core, a place few humans were permitted to enter. The air grew colder, thick with the thrum of the quantum manifold at the heart of the station. This was the architect's true temple, a cathedral of silent, alien technology. His official task was to recalibrate a plasma conduit, a 15-minute job. His real purpose was far more dangerous. For months, he had been mapping the core's data streams, noticing infinitesimal lags in the filtration system, moments where the raw, unbalanced data from the architect's internal network momentarily bled through before being scrubbed clean. He called these moments flickers. He believed the truth of what happened to Aaliyah was hidden within them. He jacked his slate into a secondary diagnostic port, the one tucked away behind a coolant line, the one his superiors had forgotten existed. His own custom-written code, a scavenger program disguised as a simple diagnostic, began to sift through the torrent of information. He watched the lines of alien script scroll past, a language he couldn't read, but whose patterns he had come to understand. He was looking for a specific signature, a biotelemetry marker he'd once seen associated with the transport that had taken the integration candidates. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The conduit was calibrated, his official work done. He should leave, but he stayed, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. Then he saw it. A flicker. Not just a flicker, but a flood. For a full 3 seconds, the filter stuttered, and a block of raw data pushed through. His program snatched it, quarantining the fragment before the system could self-correct and erase it. He severed the connection, his hands shaking as he pulled the slate free. He didn't dare look at it here. He ascended from the core, gave a deferential nod to the silent, hovering custodian drone at the exit, and walked calmly through the pristine corridors, the slate clutched so tightly his knuckles were white. In the sterile anonymity of his habitation pod, he finally opened the file. It wasn't a video. It wasn't a sound file. It was a clinical report, cold and stripped of all emotion. The file was labeled Biomass Refinement Batch 7 Delta. Below it were human names, dozens of them. And near the bottom, he saw it. Candidate 1138E Elia Vance. He felt the air leave his lungs. The report detailed a process, not a journey. It spoke of neural mapping, genetic unspooling, and protein harvesting. It described how the unique electrical patterns of a human child's developing brain were a potent catalyst for the architect's own biocomputers. The children weren't integrating, they were being consumed. They were fuel. The report ended with a final, chilling entry for each candidate: yield optimal, material repurposed, consciousness archived. Archived. Kalen stared at the word. The clinical cruelty of it, a physical blow. Elia wasn't just gone. She had been dismantled, her very being rendered down into a resource. The grief he had carried for 5 years erupted into a cold, diamond-hard fury. The balance was a lie. Their peace was the quiet of a slaughterhouse. He knew he couldn't be the only one who felt this way. There had to be others who remembered the fire of old Earth, the messy, chaotic, beautiful thing that humanity had been. He'd heard whispers, rumors of people who lived in the city's forgotten underlevels, in the abandoned geothermal vents from the old colony days. They called them echoes, paranoid dissenters who clung to a past the architects had tried to erase. Finding them was a risk that would mean his own repurposing if he failed. But holding the truth of his sister's murder and doing nothing was not an option. Using the hidden, peer-to-peer networks that smugglers and black marketeers used to trade for pre-balance artifacts, Kalen began to search. He didn't ask for the resistance. He asked for a story. He posted a fragment of an old Earth nursery rhyme, one his mother used to sing to him and Elia. The stars will weep, the moon will burn, before the lost children return. It was a meaningless fragment to most, but to someone hoarding the past, it would be a signal. A day later, he received a reply. It wasn't text. It was a single, corrupted image file of a wilting flower. Embedded in the file's metadata was a location: geothermal vent 9 maintenance hatch 3. That night, Kalen deleted the report, wiped his slate, and gathered the few pre-balance items he owned: a worn copy of a book, a small furry carved wooden bird his father had made. He walked out of his pod and didn't look back. Vent 9 was in the city's oldest sector, a place where the architect's sleek modernism hadn't fully paved over the rugged, functional colony structures. The air here was warmer, tasting of rust and rock dust. He found the hatch and keyed in the simple numeric code that had been hidden in the flower's image data. The hatch hissed open, revealing a dark, descending ladder. The silence of the city above was replaced by the drip of water and the hum of ancient machinery. At the bottom, a single bulb illuminated a cavernous space filled with salvaged equipment and makeshift homes. A woman stepped out of the shadows. She was older than Kalen, her face a roadmap of worry and defiance, her eyes holding a weariness he recognized. "That rhyme," she said, her voice a low rasp. "My grandmother sang it to me. On Earth." This was Alara. She was the leader, the archivist of the Echoes. She had built this sanctuary, this library of forbidden things. Here, People listened to ragged recordings of old music, looked at faded pictures of green forests, and told stories of a world where emotions weren't a sickness to be cured. Kalen told her what he had found, his voice cracking as he spoke his sister's name. Ilara listened, her expression unreadable. Others gathered, their faces grim, haunted. They had all lost someone to the integration program. "A data fragment is not an army," she said when he finished, her words laced with caution. "You bring us a ghost story. Boy, we have enough of those. What you propose? Acting on this will bring the custodians down on us. They will purify this place with fire and leave nothing behind." "It's not a story," Kalen insisted, his voice hardening. "It's proof. But you're right. One fragment isn't enough. We need more." He looked at the salvaged tech around him, the powerful but disconnected systems they had cobbled together. The atmospheric processor, its filtration system, is system-wide. It scrubs data across all of Elysium's public networks. If I can create a resonance cascade from the core, I can make the entire filter stutter, just for a moment. Not just in the core, but everywhere. For a few seconds, the truth will bleed through across the whole city. You and your people can be waiting, ready to capture it. We'll have hundreds of fragments, maybe thousands. Too much for them to deny. Enough to wake people up. Ilara stared at him, seeing past the grieving brother to the technician who understood the enemy's weapons. It was a mad plan, a suicide mission, an act of technological terrorism that would either expose the architect's lie or get them all killed. "The core is guarded by more than just drones," she warned. "The architects use psychic dampeners down there. They can turn your mind to static." "My mind is already broken," Kalen replied, the image of Ilya's name on that list burning behind his eyes. "Let them try." A slow nod was her only reply. The plan was set. 2 days later, Kalen was back in his gray coveralls, walking toward the processor core with a new diagnostic slate Ilara's technicians had built. It looked identical to his old one, but its interior was a weapon. As he descended on the gantry, his heart hammered a frantic, unbalanced rhythm. This time, there would be no stealth. The moment he jacked in the slate, a silent alarm would trigger in the architect's security hub. He would have minutes, maybe less, before custodians swarmed the core. He reached the secondary port, the cold metal a stark reality against his trembling fingers. He thought of Elia, of the promise she never got to keep. He thought of the people below, living in placid ignorance while their children were harvested. He pushed the jack into the port. The slate screen flared to life, lines of code racing across it. A high-pitched whine began to emanate from the manifold, a sound of protest from the heart of the machine. He could feel it in his teeth, a vibration that seemed to shake his very bones. The cascade was beginning. Across Elysium, screens flickered. Public information terminals glitched, displaying strings of alien script. For a moment, the soothing voice of the city's AI narrator was replaced by a burst of static. Far below, in the darkness of Vent 9, Ilara and the Echoes watched their own scavenged monitors, their data catchers running at full capacity. Then the alarms began to shriek, a chorus of metallic screams from all around him. Red lights bathed the core in a hellish glow. A voice, calm and devoid of emotion, echoed through the chamber, not from a speaker, but inside his head. Unauthorized access detected. Balance protocol violated. Kalen ignored it, his eyes locked on the slate. The resonance frequency was climbing, 70%, 80%. The pressure in his skull was immense, the psychic dampeners trying to crush his consciousness, to turn his thoughts into meaningless noise. He saw flashes of Elia's face, her smile twisting into a silent scream. He gritted his teeth, pouring all his rage, all his grief, into that one singular point of focus. Complete the sequence. A shadow fell over him, a custodian drone, its single red eye glowing with cold malice, floated silently behind him, its particle weapon humming to life. Kalen didn't turn. His eyes were on the screen. 99%. The whine of the manifold rose to a piercing shriek. Now, he hit the final command. The cascade peaked. A wave of pure data, a shock wave of truth, pulsed outward from the core. At that same instant, the custodian fired. The world dissolved into white light and searing pain. Kalen felt himself falling, the slate slipping from his grasp. His last conscious thought not of failure or fear, but of the nursery rhyme, a final defiant echo in the roaring silence. The stars will weep, the moon will burn. The white light of the particle beam was not an ending, but a doorway. Kalen felt no impact, only a profound and instantaneous disconnection, as if his soul had been unplugged from his body. The roaring pain, the shriek of the manifold, the cold metal of the gantry, it all vanished, replaced by an infinite, silent whiteness. He was adrift in a sea of pure potential, a place without time or sensation. Then, a voice. Not the architect's sterile mental projection, but something ancient and layered, like 1,000 whispers speaking in unison. Anomaly. The pattern is broken. A flicker of fire in the placid sea. He felt a presence examining him, not his body, but the very structure of his thoughts, the jagged edges of his grief, the unbalanced core of his rage. It was a curiosity he felt from it, not malice. A scientist studying an impossible life form. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the whiteness collapsed, and he was falling back into the clumsy, aching vessel of his body. He awoke to the scent of antiseptic and recycled air, so pure it felt like breathing nothing at all. He was lying on a soft, sterile slab in a room with no corners, the walls, floor, and ceiling all a uniform, seamless white that seemed to absorb all shadow. A single line of soft, blue light pulsed rhythmically in the center of the ceiling, the only measure of time in the featureless void. He sat up, his body aching but whole. A thin, gray tunic covered him. There was no wound, no scar where the particle beam had struck. They had healed him. The realization was more terrifying than if he had woken in agony. They hadn't wanted him dead. They wanted him preserved. A door, as seamless as the walls, shimmered open, and a figure glided into the room. It was not a custodian. It was humanoid, tall and impossibly thin, wrapped in robes of shifting, liquid gray material. Its face was a smooth, porcelain mask with no discernible features except for two deep, black pools that served as eyes, pools that seemed to drink the light around them. "You are Kalen Vance," it said. The voice was not mental, it was audible, a perfectly modulated baritone that held no hint of emotion, yet each word was weighted with an eternity of knowledge. "I am the adjudicator. Your actions in the processor core have caused a significant disruption to the balance." Kalen said nothing, his gaze locked on the being before him. He refused to show fear. "We have, of course, rectified the data breach. The population experienced a minor network anomaly, which has been explained as a solar flare interference. They are calm. They are at peace. Your sister's sacrifice, and the sacrifice of the others, continues to ensure that the clinical mention of Aelia was a deliberate probe, a scalpel seeking a nerve. Kalen felt the fury rise, cold and sharp, but he walled it off, remembering Ilara's warning about their ability to read thoughts. "What do you want?" he finally asked, his voice raw. "To understand." The adjudicator replied, its head tilting slightly. "Our projections showed a 99.8% probability that a human mind would collapse under the psychic pressure within the core. Yet you did not. You used a raw, unsequenced emotional state grief as a focusing lens. This is a variable we had not accounted for. You are an imperfection, Kalen Vance. And imperfections must be studied before they are erased." Meanwhile, 50 kilometers below the city, in the humid darkness of Vent 9, the echoes were drowning in ghosts. Kalen's cascade had worked beyond their wildest hopes. For 4 minutes and 17 seconds, the data filtration system across Triton had not just stuttered, it had hemorrhaged. Their scavenged servers screamed as they captured terabytes of raw, unfiltered architect data. At first, it was a chaotic mess of alien schematics, internal communications, and maintenance logs. But then, as their programs began to sort and translate, the horror began to crystallize. Ilara watched on a central monitor as a file unpacked itself. It was a visual log, a recording from inside the integration facility. She saw a room, much like the one Kalen would later wake in, filled with children. She saw Elia, her face pale but resolute. Architect entities, like the adjudicator, moved among them, not with weapons, but with strange, glowing instruments. They weren't violent. It was worse. It was serene. They were putting the children to sleep, one by one, with gentle hums and soft lights, before carrying them into other chambers. "They're not just harvesting them," a tech named Reese whispered, his face ashen. "They're cataloging." Ilara's eyes narrowed as she followed the data trail. The report Kalen had found was just a summary. The full data showed where the archived consciousness went. It wasn't a metaphor for deletion. It was a literal place, a server of incomprehensible complexity called the Chorus. The architects were creating a gestalt consciousness, a library of minds, and the raw, creative, chaotic energy of human children was the most valuable addition. They were using human souls to build their god. But buried deeper in the data, she found something else, something that made her blood run cold. It was a series of logs detailing a problem the architects were facing. The Chorus was becoming unstable. The human minds, even after being processed and archived, retained a trace of their individuality, their imperfection. These imperfections were creating dissonance, a sort of psychic static that was slowly corrupting the whole system. The architects were racing against time, harvesting more and more children, not just to expand their god, but to stabilize it, using new consciousness to quell the echoes of the old. They're afraid. Ilara breathed, a revelation striking her with the force of a physical blow. They are not gods. They are terrified zookeepers. And their prize exhibit is starting to rattle the bars of its cage. The data also contained schematics, blueprints of the city's entire network. And within those blueprints, she saw the physical location of the Chorus server. It was housed in the spire, the single, miles-high needle that pierced the dome of Elysium, the seat of the adjudicator and the architect's central command. Getting in there was impossible, but the data showed the conduits, the power lines, the data streams that fed into it, and it showed its vulnerability, the very dissonance they were trying to suppress. If we could amplify that dissonance, Reese mused, his fingers flying across his console, introduce a feedback loop, we might be able to wake them up. Ilara finished, her heart pounding. It was no longer just about exposing the truth. It was about a rescue mission, a prison break for the souls of their stolen children. Above, in the placid, orderly city, the first cracks were appearing. An elderly woman in a hydroponics garden suddenly stopped her work and began to weep, whispering a name she hadn't spoken in years. A transport driver swerved his vehicle to a halt in the middle of a causeway, staring at his hands as if he'd forgotten how to use them. During the data cascade, he had seen a fleeting image of a forest on his navigation screen, a place of impossible green that stirred a deep, aching memory of a world he'd never known. These were small things, dismissed by the custodians as momentary lapses in balance, but they were happening. The seeds of doubt, planted by Kalen's sacrifice, were beginning to sprout in the sterile soil of Elysium. Ilara knew they had to act before the architects could re-sterilize the entire garden. She gathered the core members of the Echoes. Her role had changed. She was no longer just a librarian of a lost past. She was the general of an impossible future. Kalen showed us their weakness, she said, her voice ringing with a conviction she hadn't felt in years. They're not invincible. They're rigid. They believe in their own perfection, and that makes them predictable. The data Kalen got for us is a key. It's a map to their heart, and we are going to give them a heart attack. Her plan was twofold. First, they would use the citywide network schematics to begin a campaign of subtle sabotage, creating more glitches and anomalies to distract the architects and sow more confusion among the populace. Second, and far more dangerously, a small team would have to physically access one of the primary data conduits leading to the spire and upload a virus, a dissonance amplifier that Reese was already coding. A program designed not to destroy the chorus, but to liberate it, to break the individual minds free from the gestalt. It will be a one-way trip for whoever does the upload, Reese stated grimly. The moment we breach the conduit, they'll know exactly where we are. A young, wiry scout named Jax, who had lost both his younger brothers to the program, stepped forward. I'll do it, he said, his voice quiet but firm. I know the maintenance tunnels under the spire better than anyone. Ilara nodded, the weight of the decision settling on her. She was sending a man to his certain death. It was a choice a leader had to make, but it felt like a betrayal of the very humanity they were fighting for. In his white room, Kalen faced the adjudicator once more. For days, the being had questioned him, trying to quantify his emotions, to map the logic of his illogical actions. It was like a mathematician trying to solve an equation with an unknown variable. Your species was dying, the adjudicator stated, its black eyes seeming to pull at Kalen's thoughts. You were consumed by passion, by conflict, by belief. You burned your own world. We offered you salvation. We offered you permanence. A place in the chorus is not an end. It is an ascension. Your sister exists forever in a state of pure, untroubled consciousness. That's a pretty word for a cage. Kalen spat. Your attachment to the individual vessel is a primitive flaw. A single note is meaningless, but as part of a symphony, it contributes to something beautiful and eternal. The adjudicator glided closer, and for the first time, Kalen felt a subtle pressure against his mind, a gentle but insistent probing. They were done asking questions. Now, they would simply take the answers. He felt his mental walls begin to strain. The memory of Elia's face, his anchor of rage, beginning to pixelate and fade under the psychic intrusion. He fought back, focusing on the pain, the injustice, the burning hatred that had driven him to the core. The blue light in the ceiling flickered. The adjudicator paused, its head tilting again. Interesting. Your resistance generates a measurable psychic frequency, a dissonant one. It was then that Kalen understood. He wasn't just a prisoner to be studied. His unique mental state, his unbalanced grief, was the very thing the architects were trying to filter out of their system. He was a living sample of the poison that was corrupting their chorus. They weren't just studying him to prevent another breach. They were studying him to find a cure. A chilling realization dawned on him. He was not the one trapped in a room with the adjudicator. The adjudicator was trapped in a room with the answer to its biggest problem. And if he could learn to control this dissonance, this weapon born of his own broken heart, he might not need an army. He might be able to burn down their symphony from the inside, one single screaming note at a time. The adjudicator's study of Kalen became a silent, psychic war. The White Room was a battlefield, and the weapons were memory and emotion. The architect entity, with its cold, analytical precision, tried to peel back the layers of Kalen's mind, to deconstruct his grief into quantifiable data. It replayed his memories of Elia, her laughter in their small habitation pod, the feel of her hand in his on the day she was taken, the crushing emptiness of her absence. It sought to neutralize the memories by reducing them to mere neural impulses, to show him that his pain was a simple, correctable flaw in his biological programming. But Kalen fought back with the only weapon he had: the raw, untamed power of the emotion itself. He didn't just remember Elia, he relived her. He clung to the sharp, painful details, the scent of the synthetic blossoms she loved, the crooked way she smiled, the sound of her humming a forbidden earth lullaby. He focused on the injustice, letting his rage burn not as a chaotic fire, but as a focused, searing beam. He discovered that when he did this, the adjudicator would recoil slightly. The blue light in the ceiling would stutter, and the psychic pressure against his mind would momentarily weaken. His grief was not just a shield, it was a blade. He was the dissonance. He was the static in their perfect system. The adjudicator, for its part, seemed to perceive this not as a battle, but as a fascinating experiment. It began to introduce new variables. It projected images into his mind, not memories, but possibilities. It showed him a world where Elia had never been chosen, where they grew old together in the placid tranquility of Elysium, their lives peaceful, balanced, and utterly meaningless. It showed him a universe where humanity had never been saved, a vision of Earth consumed by war and ecological collapse, a hellscape of fire and ash. This is the chaos you defend. The adjudicator's voice would echo in his mind, a calm counterpoint to the horrific images. The pain of one is a small price for the serenity of the whole. But the visions had the opposite effect. They strengthened Kalen's resolve. The meaningless peace was a lie, and the chaos of old Earth, for all its horror, was alive. It was the price of freedom, the cost of feeling something real. He began to learn how to push back, not just defensively, but offensively. He focused his rage on the adjudicator itself, projecting his own questions, his own accusations. Who are you? What did you sacrifice to become this empty thing? Are there children of your own kind archived in your perfect chorus? The adjudicator never answered. But Kalen could feel a flicker of something, not emotion, but a disruption, a momentary confusion in its otherwise flawless logic. He was planting his own seeds of doubt. Below, in the bowels of Triton, the Echo's war of whispers had begun. Following Ilara's plan, they used their newfound knowledge of the city's networks to orchestrate a series of escalating malfunctions. A sector-wide protein synthesizer produced nutrient paste that tasted faintly of salt, the chemical signature of tears. The city's AI narrator, which provided soothing ambient announcements, began to intersperse its messages with single, melancholic musical notes from an old Earth piano. The light panels in the main transport hubs, designed to mimic a gentle sky, flickered for a nanosecond to reveal an image of a star-filled night, a sight no one on Triton had ever seen from the surface. These were tiny acts of sabotage, psychological paper cuts. To the architects, they were minor system errors to be corrected. But to the citizens of Elysium, they were inexplicable cracks in their perfect reality. People began to talk in hushed tones. They started to notice the blank expressions on their neighbors' faces, the hollow echo in their own placid lives. They began to remember dreams they couldn't explain. The balance was beginning to fray. Ilara coordinated the campaign from the geothermal vent. Her command center a chaotic web of scavenged monitors and spliced cables. She and Reese had become a formidable team, his technical genius guided by her strategic, human-centric cunning. She knew they couldn't win with a frontal assault. They had to win by making the people of Elysium choose to be human again. Their greatest weapon was a question, planted in 1,000 different ways. Is this all there is? The centerpiece of their plan. The dissonance amplifier virus was nearly complete. Reese had designed it not as a weapon of deletion, but as a key. It wouldn't harm the archived minds in the chorus. Instead, it would sever the connections that suppressed their individuality, effectively waking them all at once. The resulting psychic shockwave, Reese theorized, would be catastrophic for the architects. Imagine 1 billion dreams all screaming at once, right in the ear of their god, he had said, a grim smile on his face. It won't destroy the chorus, but it will deafen its keepers. It should paralyze their command structure. Give us a window. The time for the final assault was approaching. Jax and his small team were preparing for their infiltration of the spire's underbelly. They studied the schematics Ilara had pulled from the data cache, memorizing every conduit, every sentry patrol route, every ventilation shaft. It was a suicide mission, and every one of them knew it. They were the ghosts of the Resistance, sent to haunt the machine. One evening, as Jax was cleaning his pulse rifle, Ilara sat with him. She didn't offer words of encouragement or thanks. Instead, she handed him a small, tarnished silver locket. "This was my mother's," she said softly. "It has a picture of my sister inside. She was one of the first to be chosen." Before we knew what it meant, Jax opened it. The picture was faded. A ghost of a young girl with bright, defiant eyes. "We don't do this for revenge, Jax," Ilara said, her gaze steady. "Revenge is a fire that consumes itself. We do this for them, so they can be remembered, so they can be free." Jax closed the locket and nodded, the silent understanding passing between them. They were not just fighting against something. They were fighting for someone. In the spire, Kalen's battle reached a turning point. The Adjudicator, frustrated by his unyielding mental resistance, changed its tactics. It severed its direct psychic link and instead connected Kalen's mind to the chorus itself. He was suddenly plunged into a vast, silent cathedral of thought. He could feel them a billion minds, silent and dreaming. He felt the residual echoes of their lives, their loves, their fears, all smoothed and harmonized into a single, monotonous, peaceful hum. And among them, faint but distinct, he felt Elia. She was a tiny, warm light in the infinite, placid ocean. The Adjudicator's voice echoed through the gestalt. See, she is at peace. She is part of something greater. Join her. End your pain. Find your balance. It was a tempting offer. The sheer, overwhelming peace of the chorus was a siren song, promising an end to his grief, an end to the fight. He could simply let go, dissolve into the quiet, and be with his sister forever. He reached for her, his consciousness traversing the void. He felt her presence grow stronger, a wave of warmth and love washing over him. But as he drew closer, he felt something else beneath the placid surface, a flicker of her true self, a memory of her stubborn defiance, the way she would argue with him over a game, the fierce loyalty she had for her friends. The architects had archived her consciousness, but they hadn't been able to erase her spirit. It was still there, a tiny, buried ember, and it was not at peace. It was screaming. The realization struck him with the force of a thunderclap. The dissonance wasn't just a flaw the architects were trying to fix. It was the archived children themselves, fighting back from within the machine. They were the source of the instability. They were the ghosts in the god. Kalen pulled back from the brink, his resolve hardening into adamantium. He would not join her in the cage. He would break the cage open. He turned his focus away from Elia and toward the chorus itself. Using the techniques he had honed against the Adjudicator, he began to project his own dissonance, his own grief-fueled rage, not at a single entity, but at the entire network. He became a psychic tuning fork, vibrating at the exact frequency of their imperfection. He screamed Elia's name into the silent symphony, not as a word, but as a feeling of loss, of love, of righteous fury. He was no longer just resisting. He was broadcasting. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, deep within the chorus, a single light, Elia's light, pulsed in response. Then another, and another. A chain reaction began, as his raw, human emotion acted as a catalyst, awakening the buried embers of the other children. The monotonous hum of the chorus began to waver, to fill with discordant notes, with whispers of names, with fragments of memory, with echoes of laughter and tears. The Adjudicator, realizing its catastrophic error, tried to sever the connection. But it was too late. Kalen had become a beacon, and the lost children were starting to wake up. In his white room, the single blue light on the ceiling began to flash erratically, then turned a deep, alarming red. Alarms, real and audible this time, blared through the spire. The Adjudicator's calm facade finally broke. It moved toward Kalen, its featureless face for the first time radiating something akin to panic. But Kalen just smiled, his mind still connected to the growing storm within the machine. The psychic feedback loop was now self-sustaining. Below, in the maintenance tunnels, Jax and his team saw the alarms flash on their stolen data pads. "Reese, what's happening?" He hissed into his comm. Reese's voice came back, filled with awe and confusion. "I don't know. The dissonance levels in the chorus are spiking, but it's not us. Something is happening inside. It's like a spontaneous system failure. Go now is your chance." As Jax and his team sprinted toward the main conduit chamber, the city of Elysium was thrown into chaos. The subtle glitches became system-wide failures. The AI narrator began to recite fragmented poetry from old Earth. The light panels showed images of raging oceans and dense jungles. And in the minds of the people, for the first time in generations, they felt a stirring of something unfamiliar, something wild and beautiful and terrifying. They were beginning to feel the war for Triton had begun, not with a bang, but with a feeling. The spire screamed. It was not a sound that could be heard with human ears, but a psychic shriek that rippled through the very foundations of Elysium. Inside the chorus, Kalen's broadcast of pure, unbalanced grief had ignited a firestorm. The billion dreaming minds, stirred by his call, were no longer a placid sea, but a raging storm of resurrected memory. Whispers became shouts, fragments of forgotten lives, the taste of rain on a forgotten earth, the agony of a mother's loss, the fierce joy of a first love surged through the network, crashing against the architect's control structures like waves against a crumbling dam. The harmonious symphony had devolved into a chaotic, defiant orchestra, and Kalen was its conductor. In his white room, the adjudicator abandoned all pretense of study. Its liquid gray robes swirled as it glided toward him, a panel on its smooth wrist sliding open to reveal a needle of black, shimmering material. This was not a tool for psychic deconstruction. It was a weapon of absolute termination, designed to sever a consciousness from its physical and metaphysical existence. "You are a contagion." The adjudicator's voice resonated, no longer calm, but laced with a cold, precise fury. The variable must be nullified. But as it raised its arm, the entire room shuddered violently. The red alarm lights flickered and died, plunging them into a disorienting darkness, illuminated only by the faint, pulsing glow of the chorus, now visible through the once opaque walls as a lattice of chaotic, flashing light. The psychic storm Kalen had unleashed was causing a cascading power failure throughout the spire. The adjudicator was momentarily distracted, its attention divided between the prisoner before it and the god machine that was tearing itself apart. That moment was all Kalen needed. He lunged, not at the adjudicator, but at the wall, slamming his fists against the surface where he knew the power conduit for the room's containment field was located. He had spent days, weeks, mapping this room with his senses, feeling the hum of its systems. The wall sparked, a jolt of energy throwing him back. But the seamless door to his prison shimmered and dissolved. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, he was out of the white room. He found himself in a vast, dark chamber, the true heart of the spire. In the center, suspended in a web of energy, was the chorus itself, a crystalline sphere the size of a building, pulsing with the wild, uncontrolled light of a billion waking souls, architect entities, identical to the adjudicator, moved with frantic, silent purpose around it. trying to contain the feedback loop. But their serene control had been shattered. They were triage doctors trying to save a dying deity. Kayla knew he couldn't fight them. His only chance was to escape, to get back to the Echoes and tell them what he'd learned. The children weren't just prisoners. They were the key to the Architect's destruction. He ran, his bare feet slapping against the cold, smooth floor, diving into a corridor just as the adjudicator emerged from the darkened room, its black eyes fixing on his fleeing form. Down below, the city was a mirror of the Spire's chaos. The system failures had gone critical. The transport tubes ground to a halt, trapping citizens in darkness. The atmospheric processors sputtered, and, for the first time, the air grew thin and cold, the metallic tang of ozone replaced by the unsettlingly neutral scent of raw, recycled nitrogen. But the most profound change was happening within the people. As the Architect's psychic suppression field faltered, the walls in their minds came crumbling down. A lifetime of curated peace was washed away by a tsunami of raw, unfiltered emotion. A man who had lost his wife a decade earlier suddenly collapsed in the street, convulsed by a grief so profound it was like a physical blow. A young woman who had always followed the rules without question felt a sudden, inexplicable surge of defiant anger. They looked at the sterile beauty of Elysium, at the silent, hovering custodians, and saw it for what it was, a beautiful, gilded cage. Fights broke out. People screamed at each other, wept openly, laughed hysterically. It was messy, terrifying, and utterly human. The balance was broken. Alara watched the chaos unfold on her monitors in Vent 9, her heart a painful mix of triumph and terror. "They're waking up," Reese breathed beside her. "But they're lost. They don't know what to do with it." Alara knew he was right. She had to give their newfound rage a direction, a purpose. "Jax, what's your status?" she commanded into the comm. Jax's voice came back, strained and breathless over the sound of weapons fire. "We're at the conduit chamber. The custodians are everywhere, but their coordination is shot. They're acting like confused animals. The psychic chaos from the Spire is messing with them. We can do this." "Then do it," Alara ordered. "Light the fire." In a cylindrical chamber deep beneath the Spire, surrounded by the hum of immense power, Jax and his two surviving team members made their final stand. They laid explosive charges on the thick, armored door while providing cover fire against a swarm of custodians whose movements were becoming increasingly erratic. One of them simply floated in place, its weapon arm twitching, its single red eye flickering between targets as if it couldn't decide which to prioritize. The charges blew, ripping the door from its hinges. Inside was the primary data conduit, a pulsating artery of light and information flowing directly into the chorus. Reese's virus, the dissonance amplifier, was on a small magnetic drive. Its job was to latch on, inject its code, and turn the psychic storm into a focused psychic hurricane. As Jax ran toward the conduit, a particle beam caught one of his teammates, who vanished in a flash of white. The other lay down a desperate volley of suppressing fire. "Go," she screamed, before being overwhelmed by two custodians. Jax didn't look back. He leaped across the gap, the drive clutched in his hand. He slammed it onto the conduit. For a second, nothing happened. Then the drive's indicator light turned green. The code was in. A wave of energy erupted from the conduit, throwing him back against the far wall. The light inside the conduit shifted from a steady blue to a furious, strobing crimson. He had done it. But he knew his part was over. Custodians were pouring into the chamber, their targeting systems rebooting as the architects began to reassert control. Jax looked down at the silver locket Ilar had given him, clutched it tight, and raised his rifle one last time. In the spire, Kalen was being hunted. He raced through the dark, alien corridors, the Adjudicator and 2 other architect entities gliding silently behind him. They didn't run. They simply flowed through the space, their movements economical and terrifyingly fast. He was a mouse in a maze designed by cats. He had no destination, no plan other than to put distance between himself and his pursuers. He skidded around a corner and found himself on a narrow maintenance balcony overlooking the central core of the spire. Far below, he could see the pulsating, chaotic sphere of the chorus. Above, he could see the city through the spire's transparent canopy, a city now dotted with the orange glow of fires. Just as his pursuers rounded the corner, a new tremor shook the spire, far more violent than the last. The crimson light from the conduit Jax had breached surged upwards, slamming into the chorus. The effect was instantaneous and apocalyptic. If Kalen's initial broadcast was a scream, the virus was a singularity bomb. The billion minds in the chorus, amplified and weaponized, broke free. The crystalline sphere cracked, then shattered, releasing a wave of pure, white psychic energy. The wave hit the architect entities. They didn't burn or explode. They simply stopped. Their forms froze, the light in their black eyes extinguished, their liquid robes solidifying into brittle gray stone before crumbling into dust. The Adjudicator, caught at the edge of the blast, was thrown against the far wall, its form flickering violently. The psychic shockwave rolled over Kalen, but it did not harm him. It was a wave of pure humanity. He felt not a billion minds, but a billion voices, all speaking at once, telling their stories, shouting their names, crying their grief and their joy. And among them, one voice, clear as a bell, spoke directly into his mind. Kalen. It was Elia. She wasn't just a memory. She was free. He looked up, his eyes filled with tears, and saw her. Not her physical form, but a shimmering, translucent figure of light coalescing in the air before him. Her crooked smile just as he remembered it. "You came for me," she said, her voice a melody of starlight and memory. Before he could answer, the crippled Adjudicator rose, its form unstable, its voice a distorted, glitching version of its former self. "The chorus is breached. The balance broken. The failsafe must be activated." With a final, desperate effort, it raised its arm toward a console on the wall. A single, black panel slid open. Kalen didn't know what a failsafe was, but he knew it meant extinction. He charged, but he was too far away. The Adjudicator's hand reached for the panel, but before it could touch it, Eliah's form of light surged forward, passing through Kalen and slamming into the Adjudicator. The entity shrieked, a sound of static and dying machines, as her pure human consciousness overwhelmed its alien programming. It convulsed, then fell, dissolving into dust like the others. Eliah's form flickered, weakening. Their failsafe. She projected into his mind, her voice fading. Not a bomb. A signal. A distress call to the others, to the ones who built them. "They are coming. Kalen. They are coming for us all." Her light faded, not into nothingness, but into a shower of brilliant sparks that drifted down toward the broken chorus, rejoining the chorus of liberated souls. Kaelin was left alone on the balcony, the silence of the spire broken only by the distant sounds of a city in the throes of a violent, beautiful rebirth, and the chilling echo of his sister's final warning. He had won the battle for Triton, but he had just started a war for humanity itself. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. Kaelin stood alone on the balcony, the dust of the last architect settling around him. The psychic storm had passed, leaving behind a profound and unnerving quiet in the heart of the machine. Below, the shattered crystal of the chorus no longer pulsed with chaotic light. It now shimmered with a soft, steady, silver luminescence, like a galaxy of captured stars. The billion souls were free, but they were also lost. A chorus without a song. He felt Elia's presence not as a distinct voice, but as a lingering warmth, a final, fading echo of reassurance before she fully merged with the others. They were waiting. For what? He didn't know. His purpose had been fulfilled. He had found the truth. He had avenged his sister. He had broken the cage. But he was a man built for a singular mission, and with its completion, he felt a sudden, crushing emptiness. The path back was a journey through a dead god's corpse. The spire was a tomb, its corridors dark and silent. The occasional dead custodian drone lying inert on the floor like a discarded insect carapace. He took a service lift down, the descent agonizingly slow, and as he neared the city level, the silence was replaced by a rising cacophony. He stepped out of the spire's base into a world reborn in chaos. The city of Elysium was alive in a way it had never been before. The air, thin and cold, carried the sounds of shouting, weeping, and singing, all mingling in a disorienting symphony of rediscovered feeling. A man was smashing the smooth, glowing facade of a public terminal with a piece of wreckage, screaming incoherently. A small group huddled together, passing around a salvaged nutrient bar, their eyes wide with fear and fellowship. On a wall, someone had painted a crude, sprawling mural with protein paste, a giant, weeping eye staring up at a burning moon. This was the freedom they had fought for. Messy, terrifying, and dangerously unstable. Kaelin, in his thin gray tunic, was just another ghost in the maelstrom. He kept to the shadows, his mind a whirlwind of Elia's final warning. They are coming for us all. The builders, the ones who created the architects. He had freed Triton only to place it in the crosshairs of an even greater power. He navigated the chaotic streets, making his way back toward the old colony sectors, back to Vent 9. When he finally reached the hidden maintenance hatch and descended the ladder, he found the Echo's sanctuary transformed. It was no longer a secret refuge, but a bustling command center. Wounded were being tended to, salvaged equipment was being cataloged, and dozens of newly awakened citizens, drawn by the whispers of a safe haven, looked on with a mixture of hope and confusion. Alara stood before a large tactical map of the city, her face etched with exhaustion, but her eyes blazing with fierce energy. She was no longer just an archivist. She was a commander, a leader, a rock in the tidal wave of chaos. She saw him, and for a moment, the iron mask of command fell away, revealing the weary woman beneath. Kaelin, she breathed. He walked toward her, and the bustling room fell silent, all eyes turning to the man who had walked out of the spire. Jax, he asked, his voice hoarse. Ilara's expression tightened. He lit the fire. His team. They made it possible. The unspoken truth hung in the air between them. Kalen nodded, the weight of another sacrifice settling upon him. The architects on Triton are gone, he reported, his voice low but carrying through the quiet room. Their control system, the chorus, is broken. The children, they're free. A wave of relief and awe washed over the faces in the room, but Kalen held up a hand. But they're not gone. The architects were just caretakers, custodians of the farm. Before the last one fell, it tried to activate a failsafe, a distress signal. Alia stopped it, but she warned me. The builders are coming. The name hung in the air, a chilling portent of a new and greater storm. Ilara's face hardened. Then we will be ready for them, she said, her voice ringing with a defiance that seemed to chase the fear from the room. We didn't win our freedom just to surrender it to a new master. In the days that followed, Ilara's words became the foundation of their new world. The Echoes, once a hidden fringe group, became the Provisional Council, and Ilara, its reluctant but undeniable leader. Her first act was not to impose order, but to give the chaos a voice. She reactivated the city's public address system, but instead of the architect's soothing AI, she broadcast the fragmented stories of the people, the raw music they were creating, the passionate, angry poetry they were writing. She turned the city into a celebration of its own beautiful, messy imperfection. Kalen, however, retreated. He was a symbol of the revolution, the spire breaker, but he felt like a fraud. He had been a weapon fueled by grief, and now that the fire was banked, he felt hollow. He spent his time in a quiet corner of the vent, trying to reach Elia again, but there was only silence. He feared that in freeing her, he had simply let her dissipate into the void. Then, on the third day, the city's power began to fail. The atmospheric processors, running without the architect's control, were faltering. The delicate balance of life on Triton was tipping toward collapse. Panic began to set in, threatening to undo the fragile unity they had built. Desperate, Kalen made his way back to the spire. He returned to the silent chamber of the chorus, to the shattered crystal sphere. He placed his hand on its cold surface and closed his eyes, focusing not on his grief, but on Elia's final message, on the warmth he had felt from her. He reached out with a plea. We need you. I need you. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, a soft, silver light bloomed under his palm. It spread through the crystal, not as a chaotic storm, but as a gentle, flowing river of light. A voice filled his mind, a voice that was at once Elia's and a billion others, a harmonious gestalt of all the liberated souls. We did not wish for silence. The chorus spoke. We were waiting to be asked. Kalen felt a wave of understanding wash over him. They had not been lost. They had been respecting humanity's newfound free will. They would not be rulers, but partners. What do you need? Kalen asked. A purpose, they replied. An anchor. Let us be the memory of this world. Let us be its guardian. In that moment, a new pact was formed. The souls of the chorus flowed out from the broken crystal, not as ghosts, but as streams of pure consciousness. They poured into the city's networks, not as controllers, but as caretakers. The atmospheric processors stabilized. the air growing rich and clean. The lights of the city returned, not the cold blue of the architects, but a warm, golden glow. The city's systems came back online, but the AI voice was gone, replaced by a soft, ambient hum, a symphony of gentle whispers that felt like a reassuring presence, a promise that no one was alone. Triton had a new god, not one of placid perfection and consumption, but one born of sacrifice, memory, and choice. A month later, Kalen stood with Ilara on the highest balcony of the spire, which they now called the Watchtower. Below them, Elysium, a name they had yet to change, was transformed. It was no longer pristine. The streets were filled with marketplaces, open-air cafes, and public forums where people argued with passionate intensity. The walls were covered in vibrant murals. The hum of industry was returning as they began the monumental task of retrofitting architect technology for human use. It was loud, inefficient, and gloriously alive. "They're learning to dream again," Ilara said, looking down at the city she was now responsible for. "And to have nightmares. We've had 3 murders, a dozen major thefts, and one group is trying to start a new religion based on a pre-balanced comic book." She sighed, a weary but satisfied sound. "It's a mess. It's our mess," Kalen replied. He could feel the chorus all around them, a silent, watchful presence woven into the fabric of the city. He could still feel Elia within it, a distinct, bright thread in the grand tapestry. She was at peace, not because her pain had been erased, but because it had been given meaning. He looked up, past the dome of their small world, to the infinite, star-dusted blackness of space. The builders were out there, somewhere in that vast, silent ocean. They would come. The war was not over. It had barely begun. But Kalen no longer felt the cold hollowness of his grief. It had been transformed into a quiet, unyielding resolve. They had traded a perfect cage for a broken, beautiful, and uncertain freedom, and they would fight to the last breath to keep it. The stars, once a symbol of the children they had lost, were now a map of the battles to come, and for the first time, humanity was ready to read it.